Song there tonight. What a great old hymn there, Blessed Assurance. Great reminder of God's faithfulness to us. I do want to mention a few things before we get into our Bible study tonight. Hopefully if you receive our updates on our prayer list on the email, you should have got one of those emails this afternoon with an update on that. I think there was just one addition that we added to that, and I believe it was Larry Mons, M-O-N-D-S. That's Amy Daly's brother. He's in the hospital, not doing well, so we want to make sure we lift up Larry. Continue to pray for Ray Green. If you received the One Call Now messages, we had one of those go out on Monday. They had to take him to the hospital on Monday morning early. He had a seizure. That's the word I was looking for. He had a seizure, and so they have done the test, and it was a seizure. And so we want to remember Ray and Ann in our prayers. I know we've been praying for Ray ongoing for quite some time, but we need to lift up some special prayers for him. Hopefully they'll get him put into a rehab in the next day or so, and talking, and it seems to be okay that way, but just some things with his arms right now that's not working well. So just remember Ray and Ann Green. Of course, continue to pray for our country, and with all that we're going through with the election and not sure what's happening there. We just need to lift up our country and just pray that, that the truth will be shown, and I think that's the best way that we can pray for our country and for all those elected officials, that they would make decisions and do things according to the Word of God and the principles that are there. And I know it can be very frustrating and very discouraging even trying to watch anything about it, because we don't know what we're being told, if it's the truth or partial truth or no truth at all. So it makes it difficult. But don't lose sight, though. We know who's on the throne, and that's where our confidence lies, is that we know the Lord is still on the throne, and He's got all this under His control, and we just need to make sure that we rest in that. And so tonight we're going to be looking in chapter 46 of Genesis. I'm not sure how far we'll get through this tonight, but we're going to be again continuing our journey with the study of Joseph, and he's the main character, and he's been the main character now for a number of chapters, and we've been looking at the importance of our walk of faith, because that's what our relationship with God is all about. It's about faith, trusting Him, and it's not just for a little bit. It's for the whole duration. We're trusting Him with everything, and we see this exemplified so well in the life of Joseph, and so many things that we can learn from him. And of course, tonight we're going to be picking up where we left off last week, as we see that Joseph's brothers finally were able to find out that Joseph is alive. Right? They'd sold him off into slavery about 22 years before this, and now they find out that, hey, he's in charge of all this stuff here, and we could be in trouble, right? But of course, he let them know that he harbored no animosity there. He wasn't going to get even with them, but he looked at it as, hey, God sent me before you to save your lives, to prepare the way for that establishment of the promise that God gave to Abraham a number of years earlier, right? Because we've seen the journey as we went through Genesis, where God called Abraham and said, Abraham, I want you to leave where you're accustomed to, and I've got something for you. You're going to be a special people. Your descendants are going to be like the sand of the sea and like the stars in the sky. And of course, for many years, Abraham's like, what are you talking about? I don't even have any kids, right? And then, of Of course, we know that whole journey that we went through, and then of course Isaac, and then his journey, and of course Jacob. And we're gonna see Jacob, and tonight we're gonna talk about him. And one of the things that's not easy for any of us, and it's a thing called change, right? Yeah. We don't like change. I don't care how young or how old we are, we don't like change. Now, when we get a little bit older, it's a little bit harder to change for us. But you know what? Change is going to happen whether we want it to or not. So we better get on board and be supportive of it. There's a Jewish proverb that says, and I quote, For the ignorant, old age is as winter, but for the learned, it's a harvest. Think about that a minute. For the ignorant, old age is as winter, but for the learned, it's as a harvest. So, Joseph's brothers have been sent home now to what? To get Dad. Hey, bring Dad up here. Bring everything you've got, and you can live here, and you can be able to make it through this famine time, this drought time that we're going through. And as we talked about last week, they were only 2 years into it now. Still 5 more years of this drought, and it's like, hey, tell Dad to come on, pack everything up, bring all the family up here. Okay, so they're going home. They're letting Jacob know that. Last week we talked about when Jacob got the news, he almost had a heart attack. Remember, we kind of closed out with that. And he was overwhelmed with the news, first of all, knowing that, hey, Joseph is alive. Hey, he's in charge of everything in Egypt. He's the second guy in charge. And thirdly, he says, hey, come up here and live, and you're going to be taken care of. Don't worry about bringing anything, we'll supply it for you. So he was overwhelmed with that. But now as we move into chapter 46, we see that now Jacob, think about this, he's 130 years old at this point. And he's being asked to move from his home. Okay, think about it now. 130 years old, and he's being asked to move from the home that he's been accustomed to for probably 25, 30 years at least. Okay, now we know that he's moved around quite a bit, but he's 130 years old now. And he's being asked to move down to Egypt, of all places. So Jacob's 130 years. During those years, he's learned a lot of lessons, hasn't he? God's taught him a lot. He's learned a lot of he's learned a lot about himself. He's learned a lot about other people. He's learned a lot about his sons. Right? Here he has 10 of his sons have been deceiving him for over 20 years. Okay? That had to be heavy on a dad, right? Can you imagine finding out the news and then finding out that, hey, these 10 boys of mine were responsible for selling him off into slavery? That's why I've not been with my favorite son for all these years. So he's dealing with all this, and now he's been told to pull up roots and move down to Egypt. Now, think about our own journeys in our life as believers. There's a lot of lessons that God teaches us along the way, isn't there? A lot of things we don't understand. A lot of things that we may question, right? It's like, okay, God, why did you do this? I was trusting you, and I took a step of faith here, and it's not turning out to be exactly what I thought here, right? There's a lot of times in our life that we go through those. There's a lot of lessons that we learn in that school of faith. Some of them are a little bit harder than others, right? And in many cases, you know what? Jacob didn't pass some of the tests that God gave him. But you know what? We're no different, are we? There's many tests that God gives us in the school of faith that we don't pass either. And guess what? God's going to give us another test, isn't he? Until we pass. Just like in school, you didn't pass the test. Some of the teachers would let you retake it, right? And still be able to get at least a portion of credit for it and a little bit better grade. Some teachers may not have done that, but you know what? In the school of faith, God's going to keep giving us the test till we pass, till we learn. So Jacob's been through a lot of tests, but thank God for his goodness, right? Thank God for his forgiveness, for his mercy, for his grace. And we see here that through this, that the one thing we can say about Jacob and even Joseph is they've been faithful, haven't they? Not perfect, but they've been faithful. That faithfulness. And we see now as Jacob's 130 years old, just found out his son's still alive, his favorite son. Found out that 10 of his sons had been deceiving him. Okay? And now he's going to move. He's got a lot of things going through his mind, doesn't he? Now what, God? What? How much longer do I have to live, right? Because he was pretty much resigned to call it good, wasn't he? Especially if Benjamin didn't come back home. Remember, he sent Benjamin off, and if Benjamin wouldn't have come home, he would have probably had to been it. He'd have died of a broken heart. But what's God going to do now? What's going to happen in Egypt during these next years of his life? How much longer does he have? 130 years old, right? But I get ahead of myself. He's going to live another 17 years. We're going to see this. Okay, now it's summed up in a pretty brief section of verses here that we'll read and we'll see, but 17 more years he's going to live. So he's going to get to enjoy Joseph, his son he hadn't seen for 22 years. Gets to meet a new daughter-in-law. Gets to meet 2 new grandsons. And really be able to fellowship with this whole family together for the first time in a long time, right? God's bringing them all back together. So, how is he going to handle these last few years of his life? Is it going to be like the winter? With that proverb that we read, the Jewish proverb? Is he going to have a rough last years of his life, or is he going to have a good last years of his life? And you know what? It comes back to us as we look at however much longer God has for us, okay? Are we going to make it years of harvest, or is it going to be years of winter? It's our choice on how we deal with it. So, Jacob's sunset years, they can be autumn or they can be winter, whichever he chooses. It all comes back to the choices that he's going to make with what lays ahead for him now as he journeys. He gets ready to take this journey to Egypt. Now let's look here in chapter 46 and let me read these first few verses, and then I want to give you some of the background setting of what's happening here. Okay, verse 1 of chapter 46, it says, "So Israel," who's Israel? Jacob. That's the name that God gave him after they had the wrestling match. Remember that? Back a number of chapters ago. Now, he's still referring to him as Jacob some here, and we're going to see this in a few minutes. Okay? So Israel took his journey with all that he had and came to Beersheba and offered sacrifices to the God of his father Isaac. Then God spoke to Israel in the vision of the night and said, "Jacob, Jacob." And he said, "Here I am." So he said, verse 3, "I am God, the God of your father. Do not fear to go down to Egypt, for I will make of you a great nation there." So let me stop there, and probably on the screen we've got listed there Jacob's journey to Egypt. Okay? His journey to Egypt. We're going to see that in the first 27 verses of this chapter. Okay? And the first few verses here, these first 3 verses that I've read for you, I've put the statement, do not fear. Do not fear. Because change is something that we fear. Okay? A lot of people fear change. Now, why would Jacob fear going to Egypt? Talk with me a little bit here tonight.
Strange people.
What's that?
Strange people.
Strange people. Okay.
Long journey.
What?
Long journey.
A long journey, Robin. Enemies.
They were not friends of Israel.
Okay. Enemies. Somebody else.
Unknowingness of the land, the area.
Okay. Not knowing the area, not knowing the land. Somebody else.
They did worship God. They wouldn't God.
Okay, they're not worshiping the true God. Anybody else?
He had to unpack his tent of collecting for 30 years.
Okay. All right. Yeah, all the stuff. Right? All the stuff that you accumulate through the years in your house, your garage, your yeah, right?
Camel.
Okay, let me throw this aspect out for you to think about a minute. Where did Abraham go when he was faced with a difficult time in his life? Remember, he went to Egypt, but he wasn't supposed to go to Egypt, was he? He was fleeing Canaan. Okay? And he got himself in trouble down in Egypt, didn't he? Isaac tried to go to Egypt, but God didn't allow him to go to Egypt. So don't you think he heard the stories about his grandfather Abraham? And don't you think Isaac told Jacob about how he tried to go to Egypt, but God kept him from going to keep him safe from some bad things? So now we have the brothers coming home, all his sons coming home and saying, hey, your boy Joseph is down in Egypt, and he says to pack up all the stuff, our family and everything, and let's go down there and live. So he's probably thinking, do I go or not? Right? So they get everything together, and they start this journey. But he stops somewhere along the way. Notice there that he stopped in a place called Beersheba. Does that ring a bell for anybody? Anything that comes to mind when you think of Beersheba? Anybody? What have we heard that's happened there in Beersheba?
Is that where the well was?
There's a well there. Some people lived there for a while. If you go back and study back to where we started with Jacob's journey, where did Jacob start from? Beersheba. That's where he left mom and daddy when he tricked daddy. Remember? Tricked daddy, deceived him, and got the blessing. Esau was ticked off, so Mama said, you better get out of here and go up and see your uncle Laban. And of course that started the whole process there with Jacob's life and all his wives and his kids, right? But that's where he left from, was Beersheba. So that was a place that he had met with God, okay? He lived with his family for many years in that location. But now as he begins the journey down to Egypt, he stops here, and basically he's wanting to get some reassurance. Do I go to Egypt? All right, so verse 2 and 3, it says that God spoke to Israel in a vision of the night. And he said this, Jacob, Jacob. Twice, not just once. Jacob. No, he said Jacob, Jacob. And I believe that's He's emphasizing something here, isn't he? If we go back, the same emphasis was used with Abraham. Abraham. How about anybody else you know of in Scripture that God does the same emphasis with? Anything come to your minds? How about Samuel? Samuel, when he was calling Samuel out to speak to him, to be that next spiritual leader of the nation of Israel before the kings started, right? And then how about another one in the New Testament? Any things come to mind? Saul. On that road to Damascus, right? So we see that there's an emphasis here. He's wanting Jacob to know that hey, I'm speaking to you. Listen up. And it goes on, it says, Jacob, Jacob, and he said, here I am. What a great response, right? Here I am, Lord. Here I am. So he said, I am God. Reminding him, the God of your father, Isaac, do not fear to go down to Egypt. That's some reassurance right there, isn't it? Jacob, Jacob, I got you. I'm God. Hey, I'm the God of your father, Isaac. You saw what I did with Isaac. Hey, don't fear to go down to Egypt. And then he finishes up there in verse 3. For I will make of you a great nation there. I think that's pretty reassuring. If God said that, right? Hey, it's God speaking. Hey, God of your father, go on down to Egypt. Don't fear. I'm going to make a great nation of you guys there. And the next thing I want you to notice here is God's promise to him. Okay, he promised him to be a great nation, didn't he? So Jacob takes this journey with all he had. You know, that's a great step of faith, isn't it? This is a long journey. With all that he had, he came to Beersheba. Beersheba was this great special place for Jacob, because that's where Abraham dug his well, back in chapter 21 and verse 30 of Genesis. It's there that Abraham lived after offering Isaac on Mount Moriah in Genesis 22:19. Isaac lived there at Beersheba in chapter 26, verse 23 and verse 32 and 33. It was from the home in Beersheba that Jacob left to live with Laban in his house and find his wife. At Beersheba, God appeared to Hagar. That's where he appeared to Hagar back in Genesis 21:17, and also to Isaac in chapter 26, verse 23 and 24. And now he appears to Jacob. So this is a very special place. In the lineage of God's chosen people, right? God speaks to Abraham, to Isaac, to Hagar, now to Jacob. Now, since Jacob was about to leave his own land and go into this strange country, he pauses to build an altar and worship the Lord. So think about this. Before he heads on down to Egypt, he wants to consult with God before he does it. Great principle here, isn't there? You know what? Before we make any big decisions in our life, really, before we make any decisions at all, we should be consulting with God, shouldn't we?
Amen.
Hey, God, what do you think about this? Is this a step I should be taking or not? Hey, God, show me here. Open the door, close the door, reveal yourself and show me, is this a good thing to do? You know what? It's always good to pause and worship God. I don't care what it is that you're facing. I don't care where it's at in your life. It's always good to pause and worship Him. It's good to ask God for special help and blessing when we're about to enter a new phase of life, isn't it? When we're about to make some major decisions in our life. It's good to take a moment and pause and talk with God. Isn't that what James said? If any lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, who giveth to all man liberally and upbraideth not. And it says that He will give it to us. So we've already discussed why Jacob could be worried about going down to Egypt, because, like I said, his grandfather Abraham had gotten into a lot of trouble in Egypt back in chapter 12 of Genesis. Isaac, Jacob's father, was starting toward Egypt, and God stopped him and said, hey, you don't go down there in chapter 26. Because Egypt at that time, and maybe even at this time too, but God said go down. Egypt could be a dangerous place, right? And we see that the Lord came to Jacob that night and assured him that it was safe for him and his family to relocate. God calls him by his name. I don't know about you, it's encouraging to know that God knows our name. I love there in the Gospels where He talks about He knows how many hairs are on our head. You don't have to count very long with me. Okay? But He still knows, right? You know, I've got quite a few on my face, but you know, that's incredible when you think about it, isn't it? He knows. And it's good to know that He knows us personally. A personal relationship. I love that, don't you? I love that I can get alone with God anytime I want and talk to Him. I love that I can get alone with God anytime I want and read His Word. And you know what? He has time for me. He's never too busy. He never says, I'll call you back. I don't have to wait. You know, a lot of the places you call to try to get things taken care of, what is it? You know, you got to go through this person and then listen to that, and then they'll talk to you. Oh, this is the wrong division. Let me ship you over to this other person, that who handles that. Then you have to wait there for another 10, 15, 20 minutes, and then finally they get to you, and it's crazy, isn't it? We don't have to do that with God. We have a direct line. Anytime. He knows our name. We can have a personal relationship with Him. John chapter 10, verse 3 says, to Him the doorkeeper opens, and the sheep hears His voice. We talked about this on Sunday. A couple Sundays ago. The doorkeeper opens, and the sheep hears His voice, and He calls His own sheep by name and leads them out. He calls us by name. Verse 14 of John 10, He says, I'm the good shepherd, and I know my sheep, and am known by my own. That's an incredible thing. So when God came to Jacob that night and spoke to him, Jacob, Jacob. Hey, it's God. Hey, God of your father. Hey, don't fear. Go on down to Egypt. I'm going to be with you. I'm going to bless you, and I'm going to make of you a great nation. Man, what incredible words to hear. Hey, God's got me here. So Jacob at 130 years old is moving to a new place. He don't know what's going to happen. He's going to meet back up with the son he hadn't seen in 22 years. He's going with sons that have deceived him for the last 22 years. He doesn't know what's going on, but he knows this, God's with him. So he doesn't have to worry. God's going to bless him, just like He's blessed Joseph. Jacob had nothing to fear because the Lord keeps His promises. He kept his promise that he made back with him in Bethel, there in chapter 28. And we see that in Egypt, God's going to make Jacob's family into a great nation. Think about this, and I'll probably get into it a little bit later on in the next week or two, but they go to Egypt with 70 people. And when they leave Egypt, by the direction of Moses, they're going to be over 2 million people. That's incredible, isn't it? God blessed them, right? God's going to bless them. He's going to make a great nation out of them. So the Jews would begin their sojourn in Egypt under the protection of a Pharaoh. They're going to enjoy the best of the land, as we're going to see in a moment. So God gave Jacob the added assurance that he would die in Egypt. He probably didn't like that part of it, though, did he? He's got to die in this strange land of Egypt. But he would get to see that beloved son, Joseph. And of course, we're going to see here in the next chapter or so where he basically makes Joseph promise that he'll take him back and bury him with Abraham and the rest of them there in the cave, right? So he gets that promise across. I'm going to be buried in Canaan, right? With Abraham and Sarah and Isaac and Rebekah and Leah. I'm going to be buried with them. But now as we move on here in this passage, verse 5 down to verse 27, I'm not going to take time to read all these verses. But this is talking about the journey and loading up all that they loaded up, all the livestock and their goods, and they moved down to the land of Egypt. And if you remember last week I mentioned how Pharaoh told them to take his wagons, and he told them, don't worry about bringing all your stuff with you because I'll take care of you. I'll supply your possessions. I'm gonna make sure that you're okay here in the land. Back in verse 20 of chapter 45, he said, arise. He said also, do not be concerned about your goods, for the best of the land of Egypt is yours. That's kind of incredible when you think about it. This is the Pharaoh of Egypt telling the Jew that I'm going to take care of you. I'm going to give you the best. Not just, hey, I'm going to give you some food to make. I'm going to give you the best. That's a God thing, isn't it? It's incredible. Of course, it would have probably been cruel to abandon their animals, wouldn't it? Because if they'd have left the animals, what's going to happen to them? They're probably going to die because it's a famine. You know, nobody else has got the food and the water and the things to take care of them during that time. So if they'd have left the animals, they'd have died. So they bring their livestock with them, brought some of their personal possessions that they treasured. But now we see that they move to this new land that's very strange to them. And it names all the different children, doesn't it? And I'm not going to take time to read them all because I'll probably butcher half of the pronunciations, right? So you look at that and read it for yourself later, all right? But we see that it goes through all the sons and their children up to this time. Okay, so it gives us all the numbers, and basically, long story short, there's 70 that start out in Egypt. Starts with 70. Now, of course, Joseph and his 2 kids are part of that count, all right? So we see that there's 70 of them. So Jacob gets down here. He gets settled in a place called Goshen, okay? Part of the northern area of Egypt, and I'll get into that a little bit more here in a few minutes, but we see that he settles in this area. They get there, and look at verse 28 with me. It says, then he sent Judah before him to Joseph to point out before him the way to Goshen, and they came to the land of Goshen. I think this is an interesting statement here that I don't want to overlook tonight, and just to take a moment and emphasize it. Jacob sent Judah ahead. Now, what's so special about Judah? We talked a little bit about it the last couple of weeks. What's so special about Judah? Anybody?
Jesus.
What's that?
He's from Jesus. Jesus is from him.
That's correct. If you didn't hear what Judy said, the lineage of Jesus comes from the tribe of Judah. Okay? Now we know Judah's had some problems, hadn't he? Remember, he slept with his daughter-in-law unbeknownst that he didn't know it was his daughter-in-law. She was dressed up like a prostitute. But the reason she did it is because he had promised one of his sons. You know, she married his oldest son, he died, married the next son, and he died, and he held back the third son because he wasn't quite old enough yet, but he also didn't want to, he was afraid he was going to lose his third son, so he didn't do it. He never fulfilled that, and so it had been years, so she tricked him, and of course, he got her pregnant, you know, his own daughter-in-law. So he has some bad things going on, doesn't he? He just happened to be the one that made the statement with the other brothers, hey, let's not allow him to die in the pit. Let's sell Joseph off into Egypt. That was Judah. Now, Judah's repented, hadn't he? Because he was the one that led the whole scenario where he made things right. And he was the one that acknowledged that, hey, our sins have caught up with us. That's why we're spending time in the jail these last 3 nights. Hey, it's our sins that caused all this to happen to us. And so he was repentant. So we see that he came to that place in his life where he repented of what he had done to Joseph and how he deceived his father all these years. He was kind of the leader of that. And he was the one last week that we talked about that said, hey, Joseph, I'll take the place of Benjamin. You send Benjamin back to his dad, I'll take whatever's coming to him. So we see that God's done a work in Judah's life, and even Jacob saw where Judah was kind of the one that's stepping up and going to be the leader for the family. And really that tribe of Judah is the one that's kind of led things as we look, even as we move on through the Old Testament. Well, you say, well, what about Joseph? Well, Joseph was used in a great way. But Jesus came from the line of Judah. So there was a special thing that, again, God was preparing these 12 brothers, right? Because that's the 12 tribes of Israel, the Jewish people. So they get to Goshen. Now, the 11 brothers had already united with Joseph, right? But now Jacob. Think about this meeting here now, okay? Think about this meeting. Jacob would meet his son after a separation of 22 years, thinking that he was dead. Can you imagine the last little bit of that trip is Jacob's going, man, I get to see Joseph again. Can't you just, he probably can't stand it, can he? He's probably so excited to see his son that he can't. He's probably going, hurry up, guys, get those donkeys going here. I need to get to see my son. And then think about Joseph and how he was feeling. But nevertheless, Judah gets him. He goes ahead of them and kind of lays the trail for them to get to Goshen. Let me read on verse 26. Verse 29. So he's making it ready. I don't know if he went and told Joseph, hey, Dad's going to get here in a few minutes. Verse 29, so Joseph made ready his chariot and went up to Goshen to meet his father, Israel. There's Jacob being referred to Israel now. And he presented himself to him, listen to this, and fell on his neck and wept on his neck a good while. I'm not sure how long that was, but it says a good while. Can you imagine? Hadn't seen him for 22 years. Can you imagine the embrace and just the emotions? You know, tears of joy. You know, now we see another instance where Joseph is crying. But almost every one of these instances, they're tears of joy. Because he's being reunited with his family after all these years. Verse 30. And Israel said to Joseph, listen to this, now let me die, since I've seen your face, because you're still alive. He's like, hey, I've seen my son Joseph. That's been my dream all these years. I can die now. I'm good. I can die. He fulfilled, I guess he fulfilled that last thing on his bucket list, right? I got to see my son that I thought was dead. Incredible, isn't it? Doesn't this speak of God's goodness? God's goodness. In the midst of what these brothers meant for evil, God meant for good. Because you know what? They could have perished in this famine. Right? But God knew it was coming. He planned a way. And it all started back with these brothers being jealous of Joseph and selling him off into slavery 22 years ago. For now, God being able to protect and bring this lineage to the number of the sands of the sea and the stars in heaven. And now Jacob gets to meet back up with his son. Incredible. Now, this land of Goshen, let me kind of give you a little idea where it's at. It's located in the northeast part of the Nile Delta. Okay, if you want to look at a map later, and you can probably find a map. Some of you may have Bible maps in the back of your Bible, and you can Google anything now. Okay, just Google Egypt in the Nile Delta area, and it'll kind of give you an idea what it looks like today. And you can probably get a map that shows you what it looked like back then as well. But nevertheless, it's on the northeast part of the Nile Delta. It's about an area of about 900 square miles. That's a big area, isn't it? Very fertile, and it was excellent for grazing cattle. Oh, imagine that, right? That just happens to be the land that they get to move to. A land that's fertile, great for grazing cattle. So this is where Joseph and his father meet each other. Joseph waiting in this royal chariot, and Jacob riding in on one of the wagons that Pharaoh had provided. Here Joseph's weeping because he sees his father. Joseph, think about this now. Joseph's dreams have come true totally now. The majority of them came true when his brothers, all 11 of them, bowed down before him. Now, the other part of that dream is true. Now his father is there before him. This just came to mind as I said that. Don't you think somewhere down inside of Joseph it's like, I told you guys these dreams would come true. Don't you just think that maybe a thought popped into this? I think it did. Okay? Hey, it came true. Now what do you think, brothers? Yeah. Now what do you think? But nevertheless, God fulfills these dreams. Now, I think I got just enough time to kind of finish up chapter 46 tonight, then we'll get into chapter 47 next week. We may read a few verses in chapter 47, but I want you to see now, let's pick back up in verse 31. It says, Then Joseph said to his brothers and to his father's household, I will go up and tell Pharaoh and say to him, My brothers and those of my father's house who were in the land of Canaan have come to me. All right, so he's going to go talk to Pharaoh. Let Pharaoh know that his brothers and his fathers have arrived. Verse 32. And he says this to his brothers and his father. He says, and the men are shepherds, for their occupations have been to feed livestock, and they have brought their flocks, their herds, and all that they have. And it shall be when Pharaoh calls you and says, what is your occupation? Verse 34, that you shall say, your servant's occupation has been with livestock from our youth till now, both we and all our fathers, that you may dwell in the land of Goshen. For every shepherd is an abomination to the Egyptians.
Oh, wow.
So, Joseph is trying to prepare his brothers and his fathers. Hey, here's what you need to say to Pharaoh. You need to let him know that this is our occupation, that we take care of livestock. Okay? Because they don't like shepherds in Egypt. All right? So he's trying to get them ready for the meeting that they're going to have here in this next chapter with Pharaoh. All right? So, hey, they don't like them shepherds, all right, in Egypt. Verse 1 of chapter 47. It says, then Joseph went and told Pharaoh and said, my father and my brothers, their flocks and their herds, and all that they possess, have come from the land of Canaan, and indeed they are in the land of Goshen. Okay, they're here. And this is a strange statement here again, and I want to highlight it. In verse 2 it says, and he took 5 men from among his brothers and presented them to Pharaoh. Why just 5? He's got 11 brothers, right?
Was it brothers?
Yeah, it's his brothers that he took. Why just 5 of them? Anybody have thought on that?
Okay.
There's 11 brothers and he only takes 5. Any thoughts?
All of them together didn't make good decisions before.
Okay, all right. All of them together didn't make very good decisions before. I think you're on the right track there, Robin, with that statement, because maybe he was afraid to take some of his brothers before Pharaoh for what they might say, right? They may get themselves in trouble if they stood before Pharaoh and he asked them a question, right? So he's probably like, hey, I'm going to hand pick the 5 brothers I'm taking with me to be before Pharaoh. What was that, Mary?
Shepherds-looking brothers, the ones that look like shepherds.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. Anybody else have thought on that? You just took 5 of them out of the 11, so less than half. He didn't take them all because he was. I think he was afraid of maybe what some of them would say, right? Maybe get him in trouble. So he chooses. He handpicks 5 of the brothers, maybe the ones that he could trust.
The ones that are probably more educated too.
Possibly the ones that are more educated. You know, I'm sure Benjamin was probably one of them. That's what I would think, right? And maybe Judah, because Judah made things right. He's kind of the leader of the clan now, and probably took Judah. I'm probably sure he probably didn't take a few of the older brothers because they were the ones that had been in a lot of trouble, right? And caused some of the other things. But nevertheless, takes these 5, okay? And he presents them to Pharaoh. Verse 3. Then Pharaoh said to his brothers, here's the question, what is your occupation? And they said to Pharaoh, your servants are shepherds, both we and also our fathers. And they said to Pharaoh, we have come to dwell in the land because your servants have no pasture for their flocks. For the famine is severe in the land of Canaan. Now therefore, please let our servants dwell in the land of Goshen. You know, hey, we're shepherds. We've got livestock. We've got sheep. Hey, would you let us take care of those in Goshen? Notice verse 5. Then Pharaoh spoke to Joseph, saying, your father and your brothers have come to you, The land of Egypt is before you. Have your father and brothers dwell in the best of the land. Let them dwell in the land of Goshen. And if you know any competent men among them, listen to this, then make them chief herdsmen over my livestock. Wow. He's like, hey, you got it, guys. Take the best land. And that's Goshen. So you take it, you live there. And he says, hey, if you've got some competent men among you, okay, if you've got some good dudes that can take care of my livestock, please put them over my livestock and take care of them. So they were received well, weren't they? This is Pharaoh. They don't like shepherds, but he accepts them. Again, God has gone before them to take care of them. Now notice the next few verses, and we'll read these, and I'll make a couple comments, and we'll wrap up for tonight. Then, verse 7, then Joseph brought his father Jacob and set him before Pharaoh. And listen to this. And Jacob blessed Pharaoh. Say what? This is Pharaoh. This is Jacob, this guy that's led sheep, and yeah, he's got a big family, a lot of kids and grandkids and all this other stuff he's brought with him, but what's he doing blessing Pharaoh? What's going on here? He blesses Pharaoh. It's kind of an odd statement right here in the midst of all of this. And here's Pharaoh's response. Pharaoh said to Jacob, how old are you? What? It's just like, where'd that come from? Where in the world did that come from? You know, I've introduced my brothers to you, and you told them, hey, we can go live in the land of Goshen, and hey, if you got some competent guys to put over my herd and my livestock, do that for me. And now Jacob's presented to Pharaoh. Jacob blessed Pharaoh. Pharaoh looks at Joseph and said, hey, dude, how old are you? It's like, okay. I don't know if he was trying to break the ice between him and Jacob or what. He's like, how old are you? Verse 9. And Jacob said to Pharaoh, the days of the years of my pilgrimage. And I think that's a key statement. My pilgrimage are 130 years. Few and evil have been the days of the years of my life, and they have not attained to the days of the years of the life of my father and the days of their pilgrimage. He says, yeah, I'm 130 years old. I've had a long journey here. But I think what he was trying to get across to Pharaoh is, hey, this world's not my home. I'm just a pilgrim. I'm just passing through here. I've got somewhere else God has for me. But he says, you know, even though I've been around 130 years, hey, my life doesn't compare to my father, Isaac. I think Isaac, maybe we'd have to look it up, but I think it was around 170-something Isaac was. And then it said Abraham, and Abraham lived longer than Jacob did as well. So he said, hey, my years don't compare to those before me. And then verse 10, it says, so Jacob blessed Pharaoh, this is the second time, and went out from before Pharaoh. So, don't you think Pharaoh was probably anxious to meet this dad of his guy that was in charge of everything? Don't you think, man, I want to meet that guy's dad. This is a sharp young man. He's got things put together, man. If God has blessed him, what's God done for his father? Right? And the first thing Jacob does is bless Pharaoh in the name of his God. The true God. I think he was I think he was testifying to Pharaoh, wasn't he? He said, man, I've never had this opportunity to be before a leader of a whole land, and I'm taking advantage of it. I'm going to bless him in the name of God. I'm going to share my faith with this guy. I'm going to tell him who's taking care of me. It's God. So he blesses him in the name of God. And then he also blesses him again as he finishes up his time together. Then verse 11. It says, and Joseph situated his father and his brothers and gave them a possession in the land of Egypt, in the best of the land, in the land of Ramses, as Pharaoh had commanded. Then Joseph provided his father, his brother, and all of his father's household with bread according to the number in their families. So they're in the best of the land. God uses Joseph here. Now Joseph says, hey, I'm going to get you situated. I'm going to give you bread according to how much you need. How many's in your family? How many's in your family? And he takes care of them. What a great picture we have, don't we? Of God's provision for his people. Now we're going to stop there tonight. Next week we're going to look at how Joseph.
Kim,
Yeah, go ahead, Lee.
remember the Egyptians were, I would say they were enemies of Israel,
That's
but
right.
they were not combined.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think Pharaoh was maybe being a political person here in the sense that is Joseph going to serve his father before he serves me, or is he going to serve me before his father? How long is his father going to be here so that there's only one person Joseph has to answer to?
Yeah, that's a good comment and a good thought, Lee.
That's
Lee,
the
for you,
Egyptian side of it.
yeah.
not from the
For
Israeli
those that may not have heard what Lee said, he was saying, hey, maybe Pharaoh was thinking, hey, who's Joseph going to listen to now that his dad's in the land? I am in charge here. Is he going to listen to his dad over me, or is he going to listen to me over his dad?
So is his dad going to die soon?
Yeah, because is his dad going to die soon, and then what's he going to try to do? But here's the other thing. Maybe Pharaoh's thought in allowing them to be in the land of Goshen, this was, like I said, the northwestern part of Egypt. Maybe he was trying to keep them separated from the Egyptians. He didn't want them intermarrying. He didn't want them intermingle. And maybe, of course, God had that in control.
That's right, because Egypt had other enemies.
Yeah.
And they didn't want Israel to side with the other enemies against them.
Well, and he probably didn't want to create a lot of problems. Pharaoh, in his case, probably didn't want to put them in with all the Egyptians where they were at because of the conflict that may have brought. Maybe almost a civil war within the country because of all these new people. I know it was only 70 to start with, but they began to multiply quickly, right? These brothers and their wives and the grandsons and all, they started to multiply, because we see, like I said, over 2 million when they go to leave a number of years later, 430 years later. Robin?
Well, it's interesting. Pharaoh was not a believer. He's watched Joseph. He trusts Joseph.
Mm-hmm.
And then he meets his father. And the very first thing that his father does is pray over him and bless him. Well, that makes unbelievers very uncomfortable because the world is all about your status, what you have, who you are. And so when he says, how old are you? That reminds me of some times I talk to people about the Lord. And I'm friends, and I know they don't know the Lord, and they, whether they've got money or prestige or whatever, and all of a sudden you put God in the equation, and they will just say some odd thing because you're making them very uncomfortable. So I'm going to go back to what makes me comfortable. How old are you? That just kind of changes the subject.
Yeah, and I think that I'm sure that could be part of it, but I think another part was even like what you were bringing up, Lee, is that he's like, okay, how old are you? How much longer are you going to be around? Because,
Spiritually, there's a whole thing.
maybe concerned about that allegiance to Dad, between the allegiance to Pharaoh. So, good thoughts. Good stuff, isn't it? Man, God's Word is so powerful, and we see so many things that God's trying to teach us through every one of these little nuggets that we talk about as we've went through this chapter tonight, and just seeing the things that God put into play. You know, it's just amazing, all the little details that God works out just right for this to happen. You know, it's just not like boom and there it is. No, God had to get all these things in place. He had to prepare hearts and lives. So just remember that. God is preparing you for what He has
That's right.
in the days ahead. But is it going to be a winter, or is it going to be a harvest? And that choice is ours. Right? Father, we thank you so much. We thank you so much for your word. We thank you for the example of Joseph and Jacob, the faith that they had in you. And I pray tonight that you'll increase our faith. I think of the disciples as they were there with Jesus, and they asked Jesus to increase their faith. And Lord, I pray tonight that you'll increase our faith. Lord, I pray you'll give us wisdom as we face the days ahead in our country. Lord, that you'll give us the wisdom to navigate. Lord, help us to be a light in the midst of the dark world, and be willing to speak the truth and to stand up for what's right. Lord, we love you, and we thank you for all that you do for us. In Jesus' name, amen.